They must have known I was teaching. What can you do, Jeff? You didn't know I was teaching. That's why we're here. Yeah, friends. Joel, that's judgment. Yeah, a lack of it. Okay, so before we start on Exodus, I want to make a correction from something I said last week. I said that the Sadducees did not follow what was written in the Talmud. And that's correct, they did not. But it hadn't been written yet. Could be one of the reasons, just saying. So there was an oral tradition, and there were groups of Jews that followed that oral tradition. The Sadducees were not one of them. The Talmud was first written in the 3rd century in Galilee, and then the 5th century in Babylon. So the Sadducees didn't follow what was claimed to be oral law, even though they did. So I'll give you one quick example. The most detailed area of Jewish life is around what's known as keeping kosher, how you eat. The only thing in the law stated twice, Exodus 23 and Deuteronomy 14, that it is forbidden to, quote, boil a kid in its mother's milk, close quote. That's it. Now, without further elaboration, sounds like, you could eat a calf boiled in its mother's milk, but not a kid. But no, wait, there's more. The oral law explains that this is really a ban on eating any kind of land animal with any kind of dairy product. Separate sets of cooking utensils, plates. You had to keep dairy and meat separate. None of that would have been obvious. Now, they did keep kosher. They did not eat pork. They didn't do other things that were not specifically stated. So they claim they didn't follow oral law, but in some cases, in fact, they did. So Exodus, there's the wandering, the 10 Commandments, there's the saying, that God would bring them out of the land of Egypt into the land of milk and honey. Thank you. And then there's the breastplate with the 12 gems that stand for the 12 tribes. And no, I don't know which is which. So we're going to look at some kind of high-level things about Exodus. We're not going to tell a lot of the stories. We're going to look at some of the things Moses and Pharaoh, some, I think, interesting things in the experiences there, the theme of the book, and then talk again about the Sabbath. So Exodus 3, this is before Moses goes back into Egypt. And God's talking to him and says, as here, the elders will listen to you, and then you and the elders must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Hey, we had a little chat, right? So now, let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that he will not let you do this, even under force. So God's already telling Moses before he leaves the first conversation, you're going to go, you're going to meet with Pharaoh, you're going to tell him, you need to let my people go, but he's not going to, even if I brought down force on them, but you're going to go and do it anyway. Now, a couple of things of interest in this. 3 days? You think God really wanted his people just to have a long weekend in the desert? But that's what he says. Go and for 3 days and sacrifice. Kind of interesting. But that's what he said. So, the next verse, 20, so I will extend my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will do among them. And after that, he will release you. So God's setting this whole thing is pre-scripted, it appears. God is saying you're going to go, you're going to ask him for 3-day leave from work. He's going to say, no, I'm going to bring my force, I'm going to extend my hand, and then it's all going to be okay. He's got this all planned out. Now, remember, why did Moses leave Egypt? He was a wanted murderer. Now, he'd been gone for 40 years. Probably the posters got faded and he wasn't identified when he came back because nobody turned him in for the reward, right? So Moses and Aaron met with Pharaoh, and you all remember the first magical thing. Aaron threw his staff down and it turned into one of our favorite things. A snake. And so Pharaoh's wizards threw their staffs down and they turned into snakes. And then Aaron's staff swallowed them up. Super snake. So that was the first thing, but it wasn't a big deal because, hey, anything you can do, I can do. Okay? So afterwards, this verse is from after that event. So they went back and said, this is what the Lord of Israel has said. Release my people so that they may hold a pilgrim fest. NIV says a festival. In Aramaic, the word is a hajj, which is something that Muslims do regularly. So they may hold a festival or a fest to me in the wilderness. Okay, so think about this. So your employee comes to you, Jeff, and says, I need 3 days off because, well, not only me, I need to take everybody in the factory. Oh, you're already shaking your head. Now, don't prejudge. Listen to your wife. So I need to take everybody because, well, I've got this event that my wife has scheduled and she's going to hurt me. But we'll get to that later. But we've got to go because she's got this thing planned. Okay? No. So he said no. They left. And then there's this strange little bit of work in there. Well, sorry, before they left, Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him by releasing Israel? I don't know him. So I'm not going to release him. So Jeff obviously doesn't know Ann well enough to let me and all the employees go because of what's going to happen. But he said, hey, I don't know who they are. And we'll get back to this in a minute. And it's very strange because immediately after this, I missed some slides. And then, anyway, king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why do you cause the people to refrain from their work? Return to your labors. And that's what Jeff would say to his employees. And your break is over, go back to the floor, right? Now, immediately after that, there's this discussion between, I know there's a lot up there. So when I was in corporate life, we actually had to go to PowerPoint school. And one of the things they told us is never have more than 22 words on a slide. I typically fail. I don't know how many are there, but it's a lot. Thank you, 412. Is that what it was? So he's a very fast counter. So this is Exodus 6, and all of a sudden, God says to Moses, right in the middle of this thing with Pharaoh, by the way, I'm changing my name. Just right now. You've all called me, verse 2, God spoke to Moses and said, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. But by the name the Lord, I was not known to them. God Almighty is El Shaddai. And he just says, they didn't know me as Adonai or as Yahweh. They didn't know that. But now that's what we're going to start doing. Right now, right in the middle of all this drama with Pharaoh, I'm changing my name. I'm changing my representation. And then in the red, you can see 3 more times in this passage. I've heard the groanings. Therefore tell the Israelites, I am the Lord. I will bring you out of enslavement. I will rescue you from the hard labor, redeem you with an outstretched arm, with great judgment. I will take you to myself for a people. I will be your God, and you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from your enslavement to the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. So he says, everybody before knew me as God Almighty, El Shaddai, which is a funny word. We talked about this a few weeks ago briefly. And we see things in Genesis where there's lots of names for God. Abraham calls him the God who will provide. Hagar gives him the name, the God who sees me. In 3, he says to Moses, I am that I am. Here, he's Yahweh, which is I was, I am, I will be. If you take the letters, it's a whole Jewish word thing, but basically he's saying, I'm not just an almighty God, I am timeless. I was, I am, I ever will be. And he makes this change right here in the middle of the dilemma with Pharaoh. Yeah. No? Anne's saying in the burning bush, that's one of the forms. There are 2 more times where Moses says to Pharaoh, we want a long weekend. So in chapter 7:16, so this is God talking to Moses, tell him the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you. Release my people that they may serve me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. So Moses is telling Pharaoh, hey, come on, Listen up. Then there were 3 plagues, frogs, gnats, and flies. We'll come back to frogs in a minute. Anne's shaking her head. You don't like frogs, gnats, and flies? So there's 3. And then in 8, he again says, we must go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God, just as he is telling us. Now, he is not listening. After the frogs are around. This passage is right in the frog visit, as it were. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, pray that the Lord, that he may take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will release the people that they may sacrifice to the Lord. Okay, good news, right? Moses said to Pharaoh, you may have the honor over me. When shall I pray for you, your servants, and your people, for the frogs to be removed from you and your house? So, anybody covered up in frogs, they could disappear. When would you say to get rid of them? Right now. And what does Pharaoh say? Tomorrow. Okay, Moses says. Why tomorrow? Oh, we have a posit, Maria.
Do you think maybe because Pharaoh was like, the king over there, so he had servants who could just
Sweep them out?
exactly.
So Pharaoh had servants and he could remove the frogs and he didn't care about everybody else? Could be one reason.
But he's also stubborn.
He is. We're going to get to stubborn. We will get to stubborn. Later, there's a curse on livestock. The Lord will distinguish between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, and nothing will die of all that the Israelites have. Okay? So this is going to be a discriminating plague. Now, so if Jeff got word that all of the corrugate, he got it. Why am I picking on Jeff, he says? Because I know what you do. So Mark gets a call that all of his properties are underwater. The ones in Warren County and the ones that he just bought in Logan County. So he sends his servants out, but only to check the ones in Logan County, not Warren County. Because Pharaoh said, and indeed, not even one of the livestock of Israel had died. It appears, don't know, but it appears that they went out and checked their livestock, which had died. It was a strange delineation. One of the reasons that one author that I read said was that Pharaoh, who had a lot of magicians, was more worried about the power than the precision. That he was testing to see if this new God he didn't know could do something the next day or could strike some animals but not other animals. And at the end of the day, it really didn't matter with him because God won. He did what he needed to do. But there was this tension between them. One of the interesting things, before we go to the Passover and some of the plagues, there's a lot of speculation about how many people were the Israelites that left Egypt. Because he says, we just want to go for 3 days. Well, how long would it take them to get everybody together and go for 3 days? We don't know. What had been the most common suggestion was that there was almost 2.5 million people. And that's based on a number in Deuteronomy, I think it's Deuteronomy, that says there were 606,342 men to serve in the military. So if those are the men, you figure the women, you figure the kids, you can get up to 2.5 million. The problem is the word that was interpreted 1,000 could also be interpreted as a household or a clan. So if you interpret it as 1,000, you get the 603. If you interpret it as a family unit, then you would get populations that people have estimated between 20 and 140,000. And if you look at the number, the 70 people that went to Egypt, 420 years, to get to 600,000 surviving men would be a massive amount of growth in population. Considering they're slaves, they have a short life cycle, a lot of them died. So probably not 2.5 million. Could be. So I want to look at a couple of things, other things within the story. So 10 plagues. So you have unlimited power. And you want to convince somebody of something. Was this just a torture test? Why would God do so much when all he had to do was one thing or nothing? And it,
At the same time that he's dealing with the Egyptians, he's also displaying his power to the Israelites,
correct.
who probably haven't known a whole lot about him for 400 years plus.
Right. So the comment is, while he's displaying this power to Egypt, he's also showing his people, hey, this is what I can do. You've been here for 400 years, probably haven't kept kosher, probably haven't done things the way the ancestor did. So that's certainly could be one of the reasons.
And along with that, I can protect you while
Yes, Anne says, and along with that, I can protect you while I'm killing their livestock. So Jared's cattle is fine. Anything, if you have cattle, I don't know if you have cattle, but the neighbors, not so much. Say what? Yeah, you like that God, right? He says, yeah, I like that God. One of the big debates in the God-Pharaoh conundrum is free will versus determinism. We read that Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So one of the things we miss in English is that there are actually two Hebrew words used in the whole story. One is kavod, which means stubborn, heavy, or weighty. The other word that's used after some of the plagues is hazak, which means to strengthen. So you see the dilemma here that Pharaoh, he has resolve, but he's strengthening his heart. I am more convinced than ever that I know what I need to do, but I'm stubborn. So even if I get an inkling that I need to do something different, I'm not going to change my mind because I'm stubborn. Stubborn man. Somebody may have said that. Stubborn man. Is this God depriving him of his free will? I hear a no. Oh, two no's. We have no. He's not. He gives Pharaoh lots of choices to change his mind, to accept. But he doesn't change his mind. One other I didn't make a slide for. Anybody remember the hail? Not the one that hit Bowling Green in the 90s. The hail plague. The hail came down, and in the hail was what? Anybody remember? I mean, this is a cool, anybody in the science world, the hail had fire inside of it. Imagine that. Go to your fridge, to the ice maker, and see how much fire you get out with your ice cubes. In an environment where you have lots of gods, you'll have a god of fire, you have a god of rain, and he may have hail within his purview. You're not going to have one God that does it all. You're not going to have a God that can deliver hail within fire. Because in a polytheistic world, these guys don't work together, right? If you study Greek mythology, you read all the things about, the different gods fighting each other. Well, these guys didn't get along either. And then along comes this God, this Yahweh, and he can not only make the frogs disappear on the day you want it, he can not only kill the neighbor's cattle, but not Jared's. He can deliver hail with fire where my gods can't do that. Wow, he's got some neat powers that I've never seen. And it makes such an impression that he does nothing until we have the last. Now, and by the way, we're in Passover right now. Passover started Monday at sundown. So Monday was a holiday, and then you work until the seventh day, and then you have another celebration of unleavened bread is actually the 7 days after. Passover is really only one day, but everybody thinks of it as an 8-day event. Why name it Passover? Why is Passover not called, Independence Day? Right? Isn't that what happened? Freedom Day. Get out of Egypt Day. Why name it after the half-covered up angel with the red trailing smoke? The angel of death. Is that the focus of the plagues? Is this the top most important thing? Maybe not. And the bottom picture, significance of the firstborn. What's so important about a firstborn? Joel has talked about this in his Sunday morning classes. Ultimately, God says to Pharaoh, if you don't give me my firstborn, I'm going to take yours, which he did. The problem is that Israel is not God's firstborn. Look at creation. What was the last thing he made? Mankind. Now, it was made in his image, but Israel was not the firstborn of creation. Jacob was not firstborn. Joseph wasn't firstborn. So what's this fixation? The word firstborn, here we go in Hebrew again. There's no quiz, by the way, except for Jared. No quiz. The word for firstborn is Bechor, B-E-C-H-O-R. Bechor means the one that carries the legacy. So what he's talking about is God's looking for people to carry on what he is teaching, what he is, what he wants us to be. So he's saying to Israel, join me and be my legacy. The firstborn, they get a double portion of the inheritance. When they're of age, they take on responsibility of the household. If the patriarch dies, the firstborn takes over leading the whole family. His mother, all his siblings, all the workers, all the slaves. And this is what God is asking his people to be. Started with Moses, and he goes down through them, not just to be his message, not just to bring the message, but to be the message. Be my inheritance. Do what I want you to do. Excuse me. So Exodus is not primarily about freedom and independence. It's about establishing a relationship with God. And when he tells them to paint the blood on the doorway, he tells them to paint it all around the doorway. The lintels and the basin. The basin's the bottom part. The side posts. Some rabbis consider it similar to a birth canal. The separation of the waters has also been called rebirth of the tribe of Israel. The central theme of Exodus is actually atonement. Moses summons them and tells them, select a lamb or a young goat. This is back at Passover, and kill the Passover animal, dip the blood, and put it around your doorway. And then later he says, take a goat actually 2 goats from among your people, and one gets slaughtered. And sprinkle the blood. So the lid of the tabernacle is called the atonement lid. The Ark of the Covenant. Not the tabernacle, sorry, that's a roof. Of the ark is called the atonement lid. So you sprinkle blood on it and you make atonement from the iniquities of the Israelites and from their transgressions, from all their sins. And so he made atonement, he being Aaron, in behalf of him and his household and the whole tribe. Then Aaron would go out and take the other goat and ceremonially pass all of the sins of the people onto that goat and then send it into the wilderness. So the central story in Exodus is this. It's us being atoned with God. God doing the things through the plagues, through the Passover day, the killing that finally convinced Pharaoh, okay, get out of town. It all leads up to this, to atonement, which is God forgiveness for us. I want to move to one other thing, and I'll tie this back to Exodus in a minute. So this is a standard ancient wedding in that area. And these are all the steps. The betrothal has a cup of the covenant. Groom, after the betrothal, leaves to prepare a house. Bridegroom shows up, the bride is consecrated, a horn or shofar is sounded. They gather under the canopy. So I've got a couple of canopies up here. The one on the left is from a Muslim wedding, and the one on the right is from a Jewish wedding. So people of the Middle East used what in Judaism we'd call a chuppah, even in other cultures. Presentation of the ketubah. Ketubah is the contract. Here's a old ketubah. We'll talk about it in a minute. Exchange, consummation, exchange of gifts, and then a honeymoon. So this is how it would go. The groom would go with his father to the potential bride. Now, it could be in their village, could be in another. So my grandmother lived in a little town in Germany that was 12 miles from where my grandfather lived. And they were betrothed. And they didn't know each other. And this was in the 1870s. And so my grandfather was taken by his father, no high-speed rail. They went 12 miles so he could meet his to-be wife. They were betrothed. The betrothal was, my great-grandfather would have filled a cup with wine and handed it to his son, who handed it to my grandmother, Marianne, and said, "This is the cup of a new covenant that I will make with you today. And I will not drink of this cup again until I drink it with you when you come back to my father's house." Ring any bells? She takes the cup and drinks. My grandmother did that. That's saying, yes, I accept. If she says, no betrothal. Typically didn't happen. So, grandpa and great-grandpa go back and he builds a room on great-grandpa's house. And in my house I have, and I go. So great-grandpa would go, take grandpa, and build a room on his house. And when it was done, we're ready. I'm going to call him. No. Back 12 miles. Hey, we're here. Let's have a wedding. Don't know when the bride is coming. Does that sound, the groom, sound familiar? Remember something about bridegrooms and lamps? You don't know when. They didn't know when. And then they would gather under a canopy, the chuppah, and they would give a contract. So as my grandfather was preparing this house, he was writing out the terms of the wedding. He was putting a covenant together. And these were the standards by which he would treat her. They're still done today in Jewish weddings. Now they're pretty perfunctory, but you can find them online. And it basically says, this is the foundation of our relationship, and these are the things I want to build our marriage on. She could reject it, but again, probably not. And now, let's look at what happened to the Israelites. So I'm going to go back to Genesis 12. God came to Abram and said, Abram, leave your father's house and go to the land I will show you. So, here we have a betrothal. And then we have, not the greatest of time. The groom leaves to prepare the house, so that's Egypt. And then the bridegroom comes. God comes and saves his people. And he says, hundreds of years later, but he says, let's go. We're going to the house. Excuse me. In Exodus 19, God said, if you obey me fully and keep my covenants, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's the contract. God tells Moses to consecrate Israel. They come to the mountain, a shofar is sounded, you can read in Exodus, and they're all under a cloud. There's a cloud over the mountain. That's the bridal tent. Then later you have a tabernacle where God finalizes the relationship. The deal is consummated through the tabernacle because that's God's presence with them. And the law, that's the exchange of the gifts. It's God saying, here's my gifts to you, and he gets people's adoration and from time to time their obedience. And their honeymoon year wasn't so good because they did a lot of wandering around. But what God was saying is, I want to enter a special relationship with you. He says, if you agree to obey me fully and keep my covenant. He didn't rescue them from Egypt after they'd agreed. He rescued them before they agreed. There may not have been an obligation in everybody's mind, oh, we got a covenant with this guy, this God. It was afterwards. And when he says that they will be his treasured possession, we would not use that word with our spouse, a possession, but we would say they are treasured. No, Jeff, she's not your possession. Ha. So, there was a relationship that, just like the wedding sequence, you can paint the same picture with the experiences through the book of Exodus. So the final summary statement is Exodus establishes the partnership. Not laws for social order. Torah isn't legislation. It's about covenant. The book of Exodus tells how God made a pact between him, the nation of Israel, and it's pretty simple. I will be your God, and you'll be my people. It was a trade. Last thing I want to mention in 2 minutes. You remember back in Genesis, we talked about the seventh day was really the central point of creation. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he ceased all work that he had been doing in creation. Another more than 22-word slide. In Exodus, he gets really testy about it. Tell the Israelites, surely you must keep my Sabbath, because it's a sign between us throughout your generations that you will know I am the Lord, Yahweh, who sanctifies you. You must keep the Sabbath, for it is holy for you. Everyone who defiles it must surely be put to death. Think about the 10 Commandments. How many of them are death commandments? If you don't honor your father and your mother, are you put to death? Yeah. For this one, you sure are. If anyone does any work on it, that person will be cut off from among his people. 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day, Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Anyone who does work on the Sabbath must surely be put to death. If you didn't hear me the first time, hear me the second time. The Israelites must keep the Sabbath by observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. I mean, if you were an editor, how many of these words would you strike because it's redundant? But yet, that's how God says it. This is a sign between me and the Israelites. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh he rested and was refreshed. He really makes a big deal out of this. Rest is critical. None of the others. And even when the final tabernacle is sanctified, and the Lord said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you milk and honey, cities, children, possessions. No, I'm going to give you rest. That was his promise. The other stuff came, but he says, I will give you rest. Okay. Next week, we're going to do the book that's not only about the Levites. We're going to look at Leviticus. You should be about, if you're doing the Project 51, you should be in the upper teens. I think Leviticus 17 is considered the central point of the book. And we'll look at Leviticus comparably, kind of high level, take some of the boring out of it, and I'll see how well I can confuse everybody next week on that. We're a minute early. Enjoy the minute. We're done.